folks, welcome back to part 2 of our trimming out our engine case. So this is going to be the last of the bits and pieces we'll be installing in this video today. We'll just go through them one at a time, talk about whatever we need to talk about that might concern us in any way, shape, or form, and basically wrap this guy up. And then while we're having a look at these bits and pieces here, I thought I would bring up this Victor Wright's part number here. So this is a gasket set that I've used to restore pretty much everything on this engine, carburation, and anything that has to do with this case. I got to tell you, the quality of the parts and pieces supplied in there and the thoroughness in which they have covered literally everything on this engine, down to the smallest sealing ring to the smallest gasket, and everything accounted for. Really impressed with that. So if you need a good gasket set for an early 2.0, this would be the one I would highly recommend. Alright, so let's take a look at a couple things here. So what my first measurement is going to be is from the case outside flange to the crankshaft inside flange there. So let's just take a measurement on that just to see where we are. Okay, I'm coming up with about 12.5 millimeters. Okay, and then our seal is about 9.5 millimeters strong. So what we want to do is we just want to put it in there. I don't want to be up against this flange here. I'm just going to be flush with the backside of the case. The inner lip here should tuck in this little slotted groove area here and just be free spinning in that area. And so when you're looking at an oil seal that goes on a crankshaft, whether it be front or rear, always going to have a spring on it. The inside edges are going to be tapered inwards, and that's so when the crank is spinning, the oil moves in that direction rather than this direction. The whole idea of the spring is clamping pressure, right? So it just clamps down onto your shaft there, and that's what holds it tight and keeps the oil in. So on this one here, I've already kind of done a dry fit. Just going to press it on there very gently. It doesn't look like it's going to be too tight where we need to pound it in. So for best sealing for me, I'm just going to leave this dry on the outside. We're going to press it in there. The inside, I'm going to put some assembly lube, some oil, and squeeze it in and try and get it flush with this side. Tool here, and I like to put a little bit inside the spring. Okay, so I'm just gently massaging until I get right to the inside of that bevel. That's going to give me my best alignment. Okay, so that's a good alignment edge there. It's got to be dead flat. If it's the slightest bit crooked in there, it's going to leak. And then we're just checking it to make sure. We can't rotate our engine, but we can see if it's binding or twisting on anything. That looks to be pretty good. And then taking a look inside very carefully with a flashlight, just to make sure your inside seal isn't folded over. Okay, so there's our seal squeezed in there nice and tight and hopefully straight. Hopefully we don't have any leaks out of there. Let's go ahead and move on to our thermostat. Alright, so taking a look at our thermostat here. So the seal on this is just going to be the O-ring, which is out of our Victor Wright's kit. There's not going to be any gasket on the top surface, mainly because the seal is doing the sealing there. And then I just want to show you this. So if you look straight down this hole, this little fitting right here is going to be directly above the oil pressure relief valve piston and spring assembly. So that's how that works. That pressure comes straight up there. That's how it gets the signal to your unit and then off to your gauge. And then next we'll put our oil pressure sending unit fitting in place. So I'm just using grease on the threads there. This is a aluminum sealing ring from our Victor Reinz kit. And then torque values for this guy, I'm coming up with anything between 35 and 42. Let's go ahead and set it at 35 Newton meters and see how that feels. Yeah, I think that'll be fine. If it leaks, we can always tighten it. And then installing our oil pressure sending units, I'm just greasing the threads, and then we also have an aluminum sealing ring. I'm going to slide that guy in there. And then I'm just going to use 2 wrenches against each other. I'm going to have one here to hold this, and I'm going to torque this one down until it seats and seals that ring. Okay, I think that's got it. We don't want to go too tight on that because we could break something in there. Just need to seat that ring, make sure it's smushed down, and that should do it. And then next is going to be our oil temperature sensor. So same thing on this, I'm just greasing the threads and aluminum sealing ring. So the idea of a sealing ring like aluminum or copper is when you torque it down and you bear down on the surface. So you got 2 aluminum surfaces pressing together. They just kind of smush into each other and then conform to the surface texture, which is what actually gives it the seal. It fills in all the little pits and valleys. For some reason, it's not cross-threaded, but I can feel it's really tight. So I think in this case here, a torque reading would be misleading. I just want to watch that sealing ring. I'm going to feel as I bear down on it and not overdo it. I can see it just moving right about there. That's going to seal. If we go any farther, we could damage that. Okay, and the next is going to be our oil line adapters. And also I have greased the threads on this one. And then the same thing with the aluminum sealing rings. So let's see how that feels. Alright, let's take that up to 35 Newton meters. Alright, let's stop for a second and talk about what's going on with this one here. So this is kind of what I was talking about on part 1 about our torque specs, older cases and things that are going on. We don't really know the history of all the mechanics that's worked on these things and how much tightening has been going on, how much over tightening or whatever. When I thread this in here and I tighten it down with my socket, it bottoms out, it feels good. I put a torque wrench on here, I start winding it up, I get to 25 pounds and it doesn't quite like anything past that, so I stop right there. So I think this has been over tightened at some point. If I keep going at this point, I'm going to have to do major rework right here, and I don't want to go there right now. So we're just going to stop right there. That's all we're going to get out of this older case and fitting because of these conditions. So this is one of those instances where you just don't want to take torque literally. All right, so this one here is our main oil line fitting to our oil tank, and we're going to Loctite these threads and hopefully have better luck with this one than the one we just had. And then also a aluminum sealing ring. So in this case, okay, so in this case here, I have looked up torque specs on this guy. I've seen anything from 50 Newton meters to 125. I'm going to disregard all of that because of what we just encountered. So this one's a real important main feed line. I'm going to Loctite this and snug it down by feel and hope that nothing has been stretched out by any previous mechanic. So far it feels pretty good. Right about there is all I really want to do. I think if I go beyond that, we could have some problems there. So that Loctite is what's going to spare us on that one. Alright, so moving on then, let's do our safety valve and oil pressure relief valve. So in this case, I'm going to Loctite these guys into place because I don't like the direction we're headed with some of these fittings on this case. We could be okay, but we may not be okay, and we definitely don't want things going wrong here. So we're going to use our Loctite as our safety net. This particular kit right here was something that was supplied to me by Ollie's, and this is something they give out that works in conjunction with the oil bypass modification. If you don't have the oil bypass modification, I'm going to highly recommend Kurt Donahue has a video on the safety valve and oil pressure relief valve. Check out his video because there's some differences that take place over the years that you will need to really be informed as to what to do. If you don't put this together right, you can have a real problem with oil pressure in your engine. So in this case, I'm just going to go with what they've supplied me here. Rather than going with our copper crush rings, I'm going to use the aluminum sealing ring, which is flat. I'm going to check our pistons down the hole if they look good. I'm going to lube them up, slide everything into place, and then Loctite everything down, and I'm going to torque these by hand. Piston looks good. Feels about right. I think we're going to be okay there. Okay, oil pressure relief valve. That's going to be okay. Okay, I think we're not going to have any problems with that either. Okay, and then moving on to our breather cover. So this one's not quite as much stress or consequence. Just going to trim this one back here. This is a gasket that fits a couple different models of engines. Don't need this tab in here. Let me get that trimmed and then we'll install our crankcase breather cover. Alright, and then finishing up today with our crank pulley. So we're just going to install this guy. Our peg goes in the hole there. New M12 grade 8 washer to be able to take the pressure of 80 Newton meters of torque. We're just going to Loctite the threads. We're going to oil our washer and torque her down. And then we'll need to lock our crank in order to torque it down. So what I'm using here is just a piece of 1/2-inch PVC nipple that's a real thick gauge. This is a tip I picked up off of one of Kurt's videos. He uses a brass rod in there, but I think this will work fine. So we're just going to bear down against the case. Okay. So I have taken this fitting out of here, cleaned up the threads internally and on the fitting, really go with some brake cleaner, put a new sealing ring on it and Loctite it and wrenched it back down, and I think we're going to be fine there. The main thing is that we just didn't overdo it going into it. On these older cases, they're magnesium, they're aluminum, they've been worked on before. Everything we're working with here, you just really got to handle with kids' gloves. It's not like textbook engine building where you're working with a new case, everything's new hardware, you torque it down to exact spec. Things have been stretched out, things have been worked on before, and there's just a fine line between what you need to do and what you can get away with in some cases. In some cases, you just have to, re-drill, insert, and do what you need to do. But in this case, I think we're going to be fine. It's just something to be aware of while you're working with your older parts in your cases. Okay, so next video, we're going to move on to head studs and start building her up from there. Well, thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next video.